Like I said earlier, we're starting a new series of discussions tonight called Real Talks. All right, and so what Real Talks is we're just having honest conversations about maybe some sensitive and controversial topics that we see in our culture today. And I think it's important that we talk about these things because you guys probably see a lot of it, especially if you on social media at all. These things are kind of big. If you watch the news, there's a lot of things that are talked about. And I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, and so that's what this is all about: is giving you guys an opportunity to ask questions, to get those questions answered, hopefully, and so that you can be better equipped to speak the truth out in the world. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to look at a couple of these things, what the Bible has to say about them, and hopefully answer your guys' questions along the way, okay? So tonight we're going to start off by talking about what I've just called the movements, because we've seen recently that there have been a lot of what we call social justice movements, right? And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight, and just kind of talking about, what are they all about? What does the Bible have to say about these things, about these movements, and then how are we to respond as believers? Okay, so first things first, I want you guys to get together in your sections and talk about these first couple of questions, okay? So first of all, what is social justice? What do you understand social justice to be? What is it all about? And then what are some popular social justice movements today? What do you hear about the most? What are some things that you come in contact with? What are the things that your friends talk about? And then of these movements, what are they trying to accomplish, right? What is their goal? What's the motivation for them? And then what does God have to say about these movements, okay? So what did you guys come up with? What did you guys say? What is social justice? Justice of society. So what does that mean? Social justice. Who said something in their group? What was the definition you guys gave? Megan. Okay. Are examples of some of the movements, so Black Lives Matter, the LGBTQ, freedom. Okay. So freedom to speak, so making sure people have their right to speak. So social justice basically is they're basically trying to make sure everyone has the same starting place. Like a real simple version, social justice, they're trying to get everybody on the same playing field, the same opportunities, the same voting rights, same speaking rights, whatever it may be, same access to opportunities, and then a lot of different things, right? So it's a big area. It's a big topic. Some of the popular movements today, you guys mentioned Black Lives Matter. Yeah, Stop Asian Hate, I think, is a more recent one, right? Okay, so a lot of different ones. So what are all these movements? What are they trying to accomplish? What's their main goal? Yeah, go ahead, Juliana. To be heard. Okay, so the movement is to get a message out. Yeah. Right. And what do you think they're working for? Like I'm sure there's a motivation for why they're having these movements, right? So if you were to boil it down to maybe one common goal that each of these movements are trying to attain in some way, shape, or form, what would you say it'd be? You want everyone to know their opinion, know their stance. So progressivism, they want the right to be heard, and they want you to know what they think, their opinion on things. So what do you think God has to say about these movements? What do you think? So if it's a cause that agrees with the Bible, then you think God's okay with it? Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Do it with gentleness and respect. Yeah, absolutely. You guys are saying some awesome stuff here. I think if you were going to look at any particular movement, they're trying to achieve some kind of justice for somebody, right? So like the Black Lives Matter movement they're trying to achieve justice for black people, right? They want they want equal treatment for black people. They don't want them to be, brutalized. They don't want people to be killed for no reason, right? They're trying to achieve some kind of justice. Like the Me Too movement was a big one too, where they're trying to achieve justice for women, so they're not taken advantage of, not abused. That was kind of like the core of it. And of course, all of these things have political things that have been, I'm sure polarized on a lot of different levels, but at its base level, every movement is trying to achieve justice in some way, shape, or form. Equal treatment, the punishment for people that do bad things to people, and then reward for treating people right. Essentially, right? If we're really gonna kind of boil it down, um, to make sure everyone is treated fairly. That's what kind of this idea of justice is, that there's equal treatment for all, right? That statue of Lady Justice. I don't know if that's her real name, but like that she has the scale in her hand and she's blindfolded, right? It's supposed to be fair and balanced and blind, right? It's supposed to be objective. Now, God, He loves justice. God is a just God. He is all about, his heart is all about people being treated right, okay? And let me just read you guys a couple of verses here. There's a ton. The Bible has a ton to say about God and justice. Let me read you first Deuteronomy. There's only one Deuteronomy. But Deuteronomy 10, 17, and 18 says, "For the Lord your God is the God of gods and the Lord of lords. He is the great God, the mighty, awesome God who shows no partiality, no favoritism, and cannot be bribed. He ensures that orphans and widows receive justice. He shows love to the foreigners living among you and gives them food and clothing." Psalm 10, 17 and 18. "Lord, you know the hopes of the hopeless. Surely you will hear their cries and comfort them. You will bring justice to the orphans and the oppressed, so mere people can no longer terrify them." Psalm 146, 7 through 9. "He gives justice to the oppressed and food to the hungry. The Lord frees the prisoners. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are weighed down. The Lord loves the godly. The Lord protects the foreigners among us. He cares for the orphans and the widows, and he frustrates the plans of the wicked." Isaiah 61:8. "For I, the Lord, love justice. I hate robbery and wrongdoing. I will faithfully reward my people for their suffering and make an everlasting covenant with them." Okay, so God is all about justice. He's all about standing up for the people who are oppressed, who are abused, who are treated poorly, who can't speak for themselves. He mentions, these verses talk a lot about widows and orphans. Orphans and widows in that culture specifically had nobody to protect them, nobody to watch over them, no one to take care of them, right? In that culture, children, if they didn't have parents, they were basically just thrown away, all right? Women, if they didn't have a man that was yoked to them, that they were married to, they couldn't buy land, they couldn't do anything. So he was all about taking care of people that other people discarded, that other people treated poorly, that other people wrote off. That's God's heart. These are just 4 passages. There's a lot more that talks about God standing up and defending the oppressed, the broken, the lonely, all of that. So God is all about justice, okay? And that's a good thing, because he's a God that ensures that evil people are punished and good people are rewarded, okay? That is a good thing. So real quick, I want you guys to talk about, in your sections, again, these questions. How do today's popular justice movements seek to achieve justice? Okay, so how do they actually go about doing that? So it might be helpful for you guys in your discussion to pick one in particular and then just kind of talk about, okay, well, how's it working, the actual movement? How's it working to achieve justice? How are they going about doing it? In your opinion, is the method they're using effective, and why? And then lastly, knowing that God cares about justice, how should we respond to these issues? Okay. So I'm going to give you guys about 5 minutes to talk about these things real quick, and we're going to come back. So how do today's popular social justice movements seek to achieve justice? How do they do? What do they do? Juliana. Yeah, that's probably the biggest one, right? Protesting, right? Everyone's protesting something every day. I mean, it seems like there's always some kind of protest going on. So that's kind of the big thing is people are protesting. Do you guys think this is effective? Do you guys think this is achieving anything? And why? No, you don't think it? You think it's making things worse? Right. Right. Well, sure. Well, let's make a distinction real quick between protesting and rioting, right? Because those are different, right? So what is protesting specifically? Yeah, that's what a typical protest looks like, right? They're out somewhere, they're holding up a sign. There's a lot of different ways you can protest, but it's basically you are stating your point of view that is in opposition to something, right? Yeah, you are protesting someone else's stand or view, right? And rioting is actually where people go and they burn stuff down, they break things, they steal things, they loot things. That's totally different, right? So let's not confuse those or intertwine those two, because I think especially when we're watching the news, we can see a lot of them happening at the same time, right? So we have to be careful not to run those two together. But knowing how God cares about justice, how do you think we should respond to all of this, to all of these things? Because there are protests. There's protests going on all the time about some really real issues, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be happening, right? So there's enough people upset and feel passionate about this cause. So how should we respond to these issues? How should we respond to these things as believers? And knowing that God is passionate about justice to make sure that people aren't getting abused or taken advantage of or treated poorly. What do you guys think? Megan? Praying? Okay. Praying about it? Yeah, definitely. Prayer is something we should do all the time, right? Especially about stuff that's tending to divide a lot of people, right? We want unity. We want unity. God is all about unity, right? So prayer is obviously a big thing. What else do you guys talk about? Yeah, okay. So maybe actually stating what we believe, like not being afraid to maybe counteract popular thought, right? To go in there and be like, listen, here's the truth. This is what God says. If you don't like it, then it is what it is. You know, I'm loved by God whether you like me or not, right? So yeah, just standing for the truth, for sure. Anybody else? Y'all talk about anything else? Share what you talked about. When it comes to, protesting and where do we fall in all of this? I mean, God does call us to speak up for those who are treated wrongly, people who are wronged. And let me read you a couple of verses that support that. Proverbs 31:8-9. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and the helpless, and see that they get justice. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do good. Seek justice. Help the oppressed. Defend the cause of orphans. Fight for the rights of widows. Some pretty strong actions, right? Talking about fighting and standing up and defending and speaking up, ensuring that they get justice. I mean, these are pretty strong actions, right? So, I mean, what does this look like for us? And we see a lot of protesting, and protesting in itself is not bad, right? It's not wrong. When does protest become unrest? Yeah, absolutely. So when protest becomes unrest, when there is turmoil, when there's disturbance, when there's destruction, when there's violence, that's no longer protesting, that's unrest, okay? So protests that are violent or destructive, like rioting, That's what unrest looks like. We've left the world of protest and now turned into something else. Now you can protest something without being destructive, right? You can stand up for what's right without destroying other people's property, without hurting other people. That is possible, and God says that we should do that. We should stand up for those who are being crushed, who are the poor, the helpless, those who can't speak for themselves. We are called to do that as believers. So, how do we do that? Okay, how do we live out that call that God has given us, so we so clearly see in Scripture, to protest or seek justice or fight for the rights of others? And I want to tell you, follow the example of Jesus. Jesus protested. And I'm going to show you an example of it, okay? I want you to open your Bibles to Matthew chapter 12, okay? Matthew chapter 12, and we're going to start in verse 1. So, as believers, it is our goal to be like Jesus, right? That's kind of the whole thing. As Christians, be like Christ, right? Christians, we follow the teachings of Jesus. So if you ever have any questions about how we should respond to somebody or how we should act, just look at what Jesus did. Look at how Jesus treated people. Look at how Jesus talked to people. If you need to go buy yourself a WWJD bracelet like we did in the old days, what would Jesus do to remind you, okay, how am I supposed to respond to this person? Well, ask, how would Jesus do it, okay? So we're going to take a look right here. Matthew chapter 12. If you're there, say, hey. If you're not there, say, oh. Okay, good. All right, Matthew chapter 12, starting in verse 1. At about that time, Jesus was walking through some grain fields on the Sabbath, okay? Sabbath day is what? What is the Sabbath? Day of rest, right? Okay. Commanded by God. Remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. One of the 10 commandments, right? So walking through some grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, so they began to break off some heads of grain and ate them. But some Pharisees saw them do it and protested. Oh, snap. They protested the disciples, all right? They said, look, your disciples are breaking the law by harvesting grain on the Sabbath. Jesus said to them, and it's kind of crazy, right? They say, yeah, they're harvesting, right? It's the equivalent of, pulling popcorn out of a bowl is basically what it was, right? So here they are, eating popcorn, and they said, your disciples are harvesting on the Sabbath. They're protesting. And Jesus said to them, haven't you read in Scriptures what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He went into the house of God, and he and his companions broke the law by eating the sacred loaves of bread that only the priests are allowed to eat. And haven't you read in the law of Moses that the priests are on duty in the temple may work on the Sabbath? I tell you, there is one here who is even greater than the temple. He's talking about himself, Jesus, the Son of God. But you would not have condemned my innocent disciples if you knew the meaning of this scripture. I want you to show mercy, not offer sacrifices. For the Son of Man is Lord, even over the Sabbath. So here's Jesus and his disciples. They're walking through a field, like Field of Dreams. They're out there just like running their hands through the grain. They're picking it off. They're eating a little snack. They're hungry, right? They're eating their popcorn. And the Pharisees, they get triggered, right? They're offended right away. They're like, they're protesting. They're like, Jesus, this ain't right. Look at what your disciples doing. They're acting a fool. So Jesus just calmly, he starts giving examples of other people that work on the Sabbath. He talks about Jesus or David that walked into the temple, took the bread, which is only supposed to be for the priest. And talked about the priests. What about the priests? They work on Sunday, or they work on the Sabbath, right? What about them? And so he starts bringing up these examples. And Jesus just starts teaching and explaining and expounding on the Word of God, and he tells them that they wouldn't be so offended if they really understood what the Bible was trying to tell them. That loving people and being merciful and kind toward them is more important than doing religious stuff. That's basically what he's saying here, right? Like, showing mercy to people is so much more important than going to church or worshiping or that. It's like, if you miss that, you miss the goal, right? And so this encounter sets the stage for what happens next. So continuing in verse 9, then Jesus went over to their synagogue, their church, their place of worship, where he noticed a man with a deformed hand. His shriveled hand is what some translations say. The Pharisees asked Jesus, right? They pick this argument right up where they left off. They start picking a fight. Does the law permit a person to work by healing on the Sabbath? And it says in parentheses, I love it, it's like a behind the scenes note, is they were hoping that he would say yes so they could bring charges against him. And then Jesus answered, if you had a sheep, he gives an example, if you had a sheep that fell into a well on the Sabbath, wouldn't you work to pull it out? Of course you would. And how much more important is a person than a sheep? And yes, people are more important than sheep, all right? That includes dogs. People are more important than dogs too, all right? I know that's controversial, but we'll say that for another real talk, okay? A person is so much more valuable than a sheep. Yes, the law, and he's saying, yes, the law does permit a person to do good on the Sabbath, all right? Even if it looks like work. And then he said to the man with the shriveled hand, he said, hold out your hand. So the man held out his hand, and it was restored just like the other one. And then the Pharisees, they called a meeting to plot how to kill Jesus. All right, so here's what you need to know about the Pharisees. They had a very strict, legalistic view of God's law. They did every command down to the minutia of tithing on the amount of herbs they grew in their herb garden. All right, they give 10% of my oregano to God. All right, so they were really great at following rules to the strict letter, but they lost sight of what God was really all about. Okay, God's not about getting 10% of your basil, everybody. Okay, they had a strict legalistic view of God's law. They missed the real point or God's intended purpose of the Sabbath day, which was to rest and trust in the fact that God is in control and that things are going to keep moving whether they were working or not, right? And that's a good thing. What God meant for the good of people, right, to rely on him, to trust in him, they overcomplicated it with a bunch of rules, and they placed a huge burden on the people. All right, to the point where they were actually condemning Jesus for healing somebody, like literally performing a miracle. The Pharisees are like, no, that's too much, Jesus. Reel it back. All right. And so Jesus, in protest, all right, he points out the injustice that's happening here, that their religious rules are keeping someone from receiving healing. All right. And so and Jesus he reasons with them that even they would help their sheep out of a well on the Sabbath day. Right. You're not going to leave your sheep in there until the next day. Right. You're going to work to get them out. And people are much more important than sheep. Again. So in opposition or in protest to what the Pharisees were saying, Jesus heals the man with the shriveled hand. Okay. And how did the Pharisees respond to Jesus' protest? Yeah, they plotted to kill him, right? They're like, that's it. You're done. That's it. So how did the Pharisees protest? How did they go about protesting? Right. But even before that, like when they were like coming at Jesus, like what was their method of protesting against Jesus? Yeah. Yeah, they were virtue signaling, right? Basically, is like, no, this is not the right thing to do, right? Let me tell you how you're supposed to live your life, right? What's effective about that method of protesting? Not a lot, right? Yeah, it oftentimes leads to resentment. The other person is like, they won't listen to you. They'll probably end up resenting you, right? So how did Jesus protest? Yeah, okay. What was that? Facts, right? So he reasoned with them with God's word, right? Here's a foundation. Here's some truth, all right? What was effective about what Jesus did? How was it really? How did it change things? Hmm. Yeah. Right, right. So Jesus, he actually improved someone's life, right? What he did was actually improving somebody, right? Is adding value to somebody. Hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right. Right. Yeah, exactly. So Jesus reasoned with them. Like he actually had logic, right? He had logical explanation of why what he was saying was meaningful, right? It wasn't just like the Pharisees who were just kind of almost like an emotional response, like they were yelling like, "No, you're not supposed to do it this way," and they're getting triggered, and they're like immediately there's like, "No, no, no," and then when they don't get their way and they get proven wrong, they just cross their arms and like, you know what? Let's just kill this guy, right? Let's just do away with him, right? Let's just kill on him. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so it's very ineffective. Jesus, what was effective about what he did is that he stood up for what was right by actually doing what was right. It wasn't just a bunch of talk. He actually made action. He improved, he added value to someone's life. He actually helped someone out. And it was on a personal level. Like he helped an actual person. It wasn't just like he was arguing theory. Like he actually stuck up for someone that was being oppressed, like that he could see, that he could touch, that wasn't some faceless person in theory, that he may never see. Like it was actually on a personal level, someone that he knew and saw, and he didn't argue or gloat or just rub it in their face. In fact, that after all this went down, he didn't stick around to rub it in. He actually left town. If you look in verse 15, Jesus knew what they were planning, so he left that area. And many people followed him. He didn't stick around to argue it out some more or try to just like drive the point home or make him feel even less of people. He just left. He's like, you know what? If you're going to disagree, that's fine. I got other people I can talk to. I got other people I can help and minister to. If you don't want to accept what I have to say, that's okay. That's okay. So he didn't stay, and he wasn't confrontational. And if you read on, we're gonna have to cut this short. Maybe we can pick this up next week. Um, but what I want you to think about between now and then, and I think this is a great topic to talk about because this is something that is becoming bigger and bigger part of our everyday experience. And you guys are going to encounter this more. And have you guys heard of the term like cancel culture? It's like that's kind of what the Pharisees were. They were a cancel culture, right? And I mean, it's really like if you don't agree with us, let's kill them, right? Like, if you don't agree with us, then we'll throw you out of the synagogue. All right, we're gonna get a group of guys. You see later in Acts, especially I think it's Acts chapter 16. It's like Paul and Silas were going from town to town to town, and in every town, like this group of Jews, of Hebrews that opposed them, they got a bunch of people, stirred a bunch of people up, and they rioted, and they started and they beat Paul, and they threw him in jail, and they did all this stuff. And it's like they went from town to town just to kind of like suppress these people. But it was kind of this cancel culture. And if I can boil this down to one thing, there's so much more to talk about. No, it's all right. There's so much more to share. I don't know. Would you guys like to do a part 2, or would you like me to just boil it down? Part 2. Okay. We'll pick up on the conversation next week.